Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's ICCM webinar facilitated by PlotBox. Once again, I'm Niall Adams. I'm Solutions Consultant with PlotBox, and I'm very, very delighted to be facilitating the next of these really interesting seminars we run with the ICCM. This afternoon, I'm going to be monitoring the chat, the Q&A, so if there are particular things that you want to raise or share or thoughts in your mind, obviously related to the content, do feel free to jump them through and I'll be keeping an eye on those. And we'll cover what we can during this session. I'm delighted today to be joined by Julie Dunk, Chief Executive of ICCM, you'll all know very well, and Heidi Bignell, who is the Technical Advisor with the Environment Agency, specialising in groundwater protection. Obviously, the topic today, and you'll all be received this through our notifications, you'll all be very aware that DEFRA recently launched a consultation into proposed changes to the environmental permitting regulations, obviously for groundwater activities. And this afternoon, Heidi, who is obviously feeling under the weather today, so thank you very much for joining us and to discuss the relevance and the potential impact for the members of ICCM. Also, of course, looking at those proposed future permitting changes. I'll probably hand over there, Julie and Heidi, and of course, thanks both for being here. I'm happy to hand over for the discussion, and I'm looking forward to a great session.
Yeah, thanks very much, Niall. Appreciate the intro. Hello, everybody. Nice big turnout today. Thank you for joining us, and thanks particularly to Heidi for coming along this afternoon from her sick bed, even though she's not feeling very well. She has very kindly agreed to do her best. So Heidi, rather than sort of keep you hanging on, do you want to start your presentation, and then if you feel up to it, we'll go into questions and answers, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's not a problem. So hello everybody. As has been said, I am Heidi Bignell. I work for the Environment Agency, and I am the technical lead on cemeteries and cemetery development. Julie asked me to come along today to talk to you about the DEFRA consultation that's currently out for consultation, and that is on several changes to the environmental permitting regulations, introducing exemptions for particular activities, one of which is low risk cemeteries. So in terms of the cemetery aspect of the consultation, it's very much linked to our long-term intention to bring permitting in for high risk cemeteries. I did speak to the ICCM about this back in, gosh, I think 2015, 2016, something like that. And the work has been progressing, but unfortunately we've had Brexit and a pandemic get in the way, so things have been put on hold somewhat. You may have seen that we introduced a holding statement in April, May last year about developing cemeteries during a pandemic. That guidance currently has an end date of the end of December this year. And the next step following that will be bringing in permitting for high risk sites. Now, obviously, as part of that, we need to then think about what happens to low risk cemeteries. And we don't want them to be inadvertently disadvantaged as a part of that kind of process. We are very much intending to bring in permitting for high risk sites, not for all sites. But if we do nothing, we kind of run the risk of being forced to permit all sites, which is not what we want. So as part of this consultation with DEFRA, we're bringing in an exemption, what used to be known as a general binding rule for sites that we don't think are particularly high risk to the environment. And these are ones that we don't think require full permits. Sorry, excuse me. The exemption conditions within the consultation, I don't know, Annex B, I think, they apply to the burial activity. They are very much location specific, and they're based on previous research. So these exemptions are free. You would just need to register with the Environment Agency if you meet the criteria. If you can't meet the criteria, that doesn't mean you need to close. It doesn't mean anything particularly onerous on yourselves. It does mean that you may need to have a higher level regulatory control. So what you would need to do would be then contact the Environment Agency, and we can have a discussion as to whether it could fit under a standard rules permit, or you need a bespoke permit, which is like a higher level of permitting where we can have site specific controls. So we are kind of We are thinking that these high level controls, these bespoke permits, would be for high risk sites, so those that are on very shallow groundwater levels, extremely permeable aquifers next to a drinking water supply, very high burial rate, that kind of site. So the sites that we're particularly concerned about in terms of environmental risk, not those sites that are on hundreds of meters of clay and only have maybe 15 burials a year. That's not what we're targeting at all. So which is why these exemptions are being brought in. Finally, we're not in the business to permit things unnecessarily. We've got limited resources. I'm sure you're all very aware that government funds are being cut and cut and cut. And so we are trying to target the sites that are most at risk. So the exemption is kind of like a self-policing approach, I suppose. It's trying to minimise the burden on operators. It's trying to ensure maximum environmental protection and make sure that we can target our resources on a more kind of needs must basis, if you like. So hopefully that kind of covers what the point of the consultation is, why we're asking these questions. Hopefully you will have been sent the link by Julie or have access to all of the documents. And I think the consultation closes on the 22nd of December. So you've still got another 2 months to get in your thoughts back to DEFRA on that. So Julie sent me a series of questions, which I'm just going to go through one at a time. The first one was, what is a small scale cemetery development? So in terms of what we kind of define a small scale cemetery development to be, it would be a cemetery that can comply with the exemption conditions set out in the consultation document. So if I open up the consultation document, so under Annex B, there is a list of criteria. And if you go down to level to 0.9 and onwards, so a low risk cemetery is not in a groundwater source protection zone. It's not within 250 meters of a well, spring or borehole. It's not within 30 meters of a watercourse. It's entirely on unproductive strata, or it's on secondary B aquifer, but with less than 100 barrels a year, or it's on a secondary A aquifer with less than 50 barrels a year, or it's on a principal aquifer and less than 30 barrels a year. So that's all stated under 0.9 to 12 in Annex B, Annex B, sorry, of the consultation document. These are all things that you can comment on. So if you think that these numbers are unreasonable, if you've got a huge problem with it, if you think it's going to be causing lots of problems for you, then this is your chance to turn around and say, actually, we think it would be a much better idea if you defined it by X, Y, Z. This is your opportunity to provide that comment. So hopefully that answers your first question. The second question, what is a low environment risk testing? So obviously that's tied very much into what is a small scale cemetery development. They're very much tied in together. And the environmental risk is linked in with the size of the site. So obviously a larger site on unproductive strata is still going to be low risk. A large site on a principal aquifer is very much higher risk. And it's very much a site specific in terms of that one. So please read through Annex B, because that's going to help you answer those two questions. Question 3, the limits on the scale of burials that can occur within a given location. So the limits that we've set, the numbers and the different aquifer types, is done on some previous risk assessment work. It's not new, it's just transferred into this particular document. So we need to come up with a limit. It's just trying to come up with something that's sensible. The ones that are in a low risk, we don't need to have any permitting controls. We need to make sure that that's not going to cause any problem. So the location conditions will apply mainly to new developments and to extensions to those and extensions to existing sites. So these are the things that we would have said through planning anyway. They're things that aren't new. It's just things that have now been put together into, hopefully will go into the environmental permitting regulations, so we can then use that as a basis for permitting. So hopefully that helps. And the fourth question was a scenario. I don't know if anyone knows the scenario, but I shall just read it through to you. It says, as a burial authority, the parish council took over cemetery from the borough council 30 years ago. It's a small 600 plot cemetery sat in the corner of a field and opened in the 1970s with an average burial rate of 15 burials a year. The water table is high and burials often affected by groundwater within graves, although the cemetery is not affected by surface water. Based on the consultation questions, the cemetery would not meet the exemption conditions. Please can you clarify what this would mean for the cemetery? Would it have to close? Would the parish council have to rectify the groundwater issues, or would it be a case of applying for a permit to continue the current approach? So in terms of that particular site, if it's an existing cemetery, only conditions 1 to 8 apply from the Annex B document. However, because the water table is high, it does mean that it does not meet condition 3 and probably not condition 4. So condition 3 says that there must be at least a metre between the base of the grave and the top of the water table, and it must not have standing water when it's dug. And condition 4 says that the burial must not be undertaken directly into groundwater. Now, these two conditions are put in there in order to meet the requirements of the environmental permitting regulations, which says that there should be no input of hazardous substances into groundwater, directly into groundwater. And we need to limit the amount of non-hazardous pollutants that go into groundwater. So that's why that condition is there. Those two conditions are there. It doesn't mean that you have to close your cemetery. It just means that you would need to apply for a permit. And depending on the site-specific situation, it could be potentially a standard rules permit or potentially a bespoke permit. And that would very much come out of the result of a hydrogeological risk assessment. So you would have to do a risk assessment for your cemetery to determine how high risk it is. Or it might be just through the information that you provide as part of your permit application, that information is sufficient to say, we've only got 15 burials a year, but we happen to be within a metre or what have you. And it might just be, therefore, that we put in some ongoing controls for that particular site. So we ask you to dewater when you're burying, or we ask you to dewater permanently, and then we ask you to discharge that water to the foul sewer or to a particular discharge consent. A lot of it would probably be methods that are already ongoing, and we're not asking for you to do anything much more above what you would normally do anyway. It's just, these are the particular sites we're not particularly worried about. It's the massive cemeteries that are causing more of a pollution problem that we're worried about than these little ones. But we do have to have a blanket approach. We can't just pick ones we decide to regulate and not all of them. Hopefully that helps. That was a bit rushed. I apologise if that was a bit rushed. But I am going to pass over to questions now. Please let me know if you want me to reiterate any of that.
Thanks, Heidi. Can I just ask if this will apply to all types of burial grounds, including churchyards, natural burial sites, urban cemeteries, anywhere that full body interments are taking place?
It's to do with the burial of human remains. It's not to do with the fact that it's titled a cemetery, because obviously different religions call their burial grounds different things, etc. So yeah, it's all burial places as opposed to cemeteries specifically. It's not just Church of England. We're not targeting the Church of England. We're not targeting any particular religion. It's all across the board.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Thank you.
Does that include ashes, Heidi?
No, it doesn't.
No.
So yeah, ashes are treated differently already. There is already an exemption in the environmental permitting regulations for the burial of ashes, human ashes. I can't remember what the details are off the top of my head, but no, this does not apply to the burial of ashes.
Excellent, thank you. There's been a number of questions coming through there, Heidi, and I know, of course, you're feeling unwell, so we'll not bombard you with those. There's a few that we will raise. For those who hadn't seen the consultation documents, I've shared a link to the documentation and the consultation on the DEFRA website, so you should be able to pick those up in the document section. I've got a couple of questions there, Heidi. Maybe I'll pick a few. There's one actually specifically. Is this just for England or for all of you UK?
This is just England. Yeah. So the Environment Agency only covers England now. So yeah. Okay. That's not to say that the same thing won't happen in Wales and Scotland. Wales are under the same legislation as us.
Mm-hmm.
So the environmental permitting regulations are England and Wales. So this exemption would count for Wales,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as I'm aware, they're not at the moment planning on bringing in permitting for high risk sites. But that's not to say they won't. But I have no kind of knowledge of exactly what their processes are at the moment. So Scotland on a different legal footing, and I couldn't tell you what the situation is in Scotland or Northern Ireland. So.
Thanks, Heidi. And a number of questions actually around a general theme, I guess, of understanding the impact of the issues that are there at the minute, and where this research is kind of based, obviously, on the exemptions. Is there kind of records of actual incidents happening over the last while that the members in the audience could review?
I don't know if it's public. I can probably find out. I can certainly, if there is public information, I can probably circulate it. We have been aware of some issues with pollution from cemeteries. I actually did my master's thesis on pollution from cemeteries, so there's a lot of information about it, not just in the UK, globally. But yeah, I mean, current incidents, recent incidents, I don't know if that information is available externally. I will find out. It certainly can be a problem. It certainly has been a problem. I think, to be honest, more of our concerns at the moment have been with graves flooding during burial, as opposed to pollution plumes. We've had a lot more issues with shallow groundwater, which can be quite distressing for people when their loved ones are being buried and the coffins bobbing up and down. So that has been more of an issue, I think, in recent times. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not happening, but yeah.
All right, thanks, Heidi. Sorry, Julie, go ahead, please.
Sorry, can I ask a question if you're okay to answer? Is there any appetite for controlling potential pollution at source rather than trying to sort of impose the restrictions on cemeteries? So, for example, coffin construction, should we be only looking at only burying kind of natural materials? Can we look at embalming fluids? So sort of controlling the potential rather than sort of trying to permit it afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's some research going into that at the moment. There's a lot of research into natural death and natural burials and that kind of thing. Certainly, I believe that some of the plumes from natural burial sites are reduced. However, we do have the issue that if it's not, if it's more of a natural kind of basis for the coffin, the plume tends to come earlier. So with I don't know, a more traditional coffin, the build-up of fluid, if you want to go into too graphic detail, the build-up of fluid happens within the coffin before the coffin then ruptures, and then we get a plume into the groundwater. With a more natural coffin, that degradation happens much more gradually, but we see that input into the groundwater earlier on. So the actual total concentration of contaminants, if you like, is probably going to be fairly similar from a particular body. It's just the timing of that over a period of time. But you need to think about, it's not just the burial of a person that we're concerned about, it's multiple burials over a short kind of area of, or small area of land over time. It's kind of like that cumulative impact as opposed to just one particular coffin. But yes, I mean, obviously everything that can help, and if you can build that into a risk assessment to say, well, actually we've got this and this and this and this and this on the site, then that will help in terms of the permit application anyway.
Thank you. So do things like planting trees, is that a useful method of trying to control what happens to the pollutants? Will trees kind of absorb?
I don't think they absorb that much, to be perfectly honest. I've not seen a lot of detailed research into it, but papers I have seen are contradictory, shall we say. I don't think there's a lot of kind of strong evidence that planting trees really helps. Obviously, it helps the environment. I'm not saying that planting trees is a bad thing, but in terms of the pollutant from the body, pollutant loading, sorry, from the body, I don't think it has that much of an impact. But I'm welcome to prove wrong, but I haven't seen research that says that at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Heidi. Heidi, if you're okay, just for maybe a couple more, just based on how you're feeling, of course. There's been kind of to group these together just because there's a couple of kind of common themes throughout. So a question that I'm seeing here from the attendees is actually around, firstly, the timeline or potential timeline for these new permits to come in place, and also then the impact on existing graves, maybe that have been already dug or have been reserved, if the authorities then are able to reopen those if they do not meet the proposed minimum sizes.
Okay, so in terms of timelines, like I said, the temporary guidance we put in place for burials is currently ending on the 31st of December. I am currently writing a paper to our exec director to ask him to extend that to the end of March. We then anticipate bringing in permitting for high-risk cemeteries from the 1st of April next year. The general binding exemptions that the consultation is currently running will, the consultation runs until the end of December. I think we have to provide a response by the end of March, and then I think those changes are likely to come in, I think, end of 2022, maybe 2023. So it's not going to be particularly soon. But what we are going to do is from April next year is put together a temporary position statement which will cover all of the non-high risk. So it will basically state what the exemption states. So if you can meet these criteria, you do not need to apply for a permit. And that's to cover us so that we don't have this weird limbo where the high risk sites are being permitted and nothing else is, because then that, like I said at the beginning, that bleeds us to the situation where we might have to permit everything, and that's not what we want to do. It's just a waste of time. So yes, so we will be putting that to our exec director, chief executive team next week, I think, week after next. So hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have confirmation that will go ahead in April. But obviously, I will keep Julie informed of any changes and dates and what have you as we know them coming in.
Thanks, Heidi. Thank you. And certainly from the comments, I'm seeing concern, I guess, around feasibility of some existing operations where there's particularly maybe a high water table. Maybe that's what you're saying about the consultation and be an opportunity to feedback on those concerns at this stage and get those kind of noted at that point. So for anyone who hasn't seen, the link to the consultation is in the chat. And if you are able to kind of feedback to Deborah on that, please do so. Heidi, is there a cost associated with the permit?
There is, and I should have brought that with me. I don't know them off the top of my head. The exemptions that I talked about, so if you can meet the requirements in Annex B, that's free. You just need to email us or have you to let us know that that's what you're doing. The standard rules permit, I can't remember how much it is off the top of my head. I've got a figure of £800, but I'm not entirely sure. Might be less than that. And then the bespoke permit is obviously more than that. It might be that one's 800 and the other one's less. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head, but that's something that I can provide to Julie after this call, so she's got it in writing that that's what those costs are associated with that.
So it will be the same as other sectors. It's not going to be
it's in line with everything else. It's in line with, I think, the crematorium air pollution permits that are already kind of regulated. So if you have one through the environmental permitting regulations for a crematorium, then that it will be similar pricing to that. Right. I can't remember off the top of my head how much it is.
And that would be an annual charge, I guess.
I think so, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
But again, I can confirm that after this call. That's fine.
What is going to be challenging, Heidi, is that there's no central list of all the burial sites in England. It would be great if you had one, but I fear that it's going to be difficult for you to manage because you don't know where they all are. So you're going to rely on people being honest. I think people are going to have to kind of tell you they exist rather than you trying to contact them, because, as I say, it's really difficult to know exactly how many churchyards, how many natural burial sites, how many public cemeteries, how many private cemeteries. So if anything comes out of this, it might be that you are the holders of the list of sites, which will be amazing.
We certainly know of quite a lot, but yes, I'm sure that what we know of is nothing near the full amount. But we are working very closely with local authorities Obviously, they still don't know everything, but we're doing our best, and that's why we're trying to kind of get the message out there so that the people who are in the world and in the industry know the situation. So, but in the best in the world, you can never contact everybody, and I guess we just have to work and do what we can do.
Yeah, it's almost like a natural process that will kind of just happen over the next few years, I guess, as more and more people know about this. So, can I ask another question? Are you okay? Do you need to go? Or are you okay? If you're well enough, can I ask where the figure of 5 meters square for the size of a grave came from? Because I'm not quite sure I understand that.
I think it came from a research paper that was done many years ago, based on the average size of a coffin and the average depth. I could be wrong. It's certainly in a paper that I read during my master's, but I can't for the life of me remember where it came from, to be perfectly honest. But it certainly was in our guidance previously. And that's, it doesn't matter if your grave is not 5 meters square. It doesn't matter. It's just that those numbers are based on that. So if you happen to decide that actually you want to have your graves, 20 meters apart and put a tree in between each one and a lake between each, whatever, that's fine. It's just, you'll just have to then work out what your average burial rate over the area of your land is from that. We just use it as a kind of a general estimate.
There's a related question there, Heidi. The EA suggests that discharge from grave ceases after 10 to 12 years. So can the authority effectively use one, miss one to achieve that required burial plot size and then effectively fill in the gaps, I guess, after 14 to 15 years?
I don't see why not. Obviously, a human body degrades within its maximum of 15 years, I think. So within 15 years, I don't see why not. I think the problem will be if it gets pushed sooner than that. Certainly through my research, I saw reports of bodies being moved after just 2 years where there's not really any decomposition at all, and that's really unpleasant for everybody. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? And I think you have to kind of take on board people's thoughts about their loved ones as well. But in terms of burying in between, I don't see a problem with that, assuming it's more than 15 years later.
Okay, thanks, Heidi. Are you okay for a few more, Heidi?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I'm trying to group these together. There's maybe a couple of really specific ones that might be interesting to the group. So we have an attendee who is operating 10 natural burial grounds. Each has a hydrogeological risk assessment as part of the planning process. How would these be affected by the permit?
So the results of that hydrological risk assessment would then be taken as part of the permit application. So if they didn't meet the requirements for the exemption, they could submit that hydrological risk assessment as part of the permit application, and then the assessment would be done based on the results of that hydrological risk assessment. So you wouldn't have to do a new one unless anything has significantly changed since that application was put forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Heidi. And I've had a specific comment back actually in relation to the list of cemeteries. So Mark from Devon says they do have one as part of their pandemic planning. So maybe the other authorities already have gone through that and may be able to suffice and help out. I'm seeing a lot of comments, Heidi, I guess, concern about the impact where authorities are really struggling for burial space and the impact where some of those particularly facilities may become unviable. Maybe that's something we could dig into in a longer session, just if there's more detail behind this, and give the attendees time to kind of put together a few questions on some of those topics.
I'm perfectly happy to answer. If Julie wants to send me an email list of questions after this, I'm quite happy to write answers to that. That's not a problem. Take it away. Please do use the consultation to provide comments and thoughts on what we're proposing in terms of the exemptions. And if anyone has any major questions, then please just contact me. It's not a problem.
Okay, thanks, Heidi. And just one question actually has come up a couple of times. So the 5 meters squared, is that relating to the space on the ground, or is it the cubed volume of soil?
It's this land print, so the area on the ground.
Okay, Brilliant, thank you.
That presents the problem because we work in feet and inches in cemeteries.
Okay, I'm sure we can work out what it is.
I can't do the math.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure we could work it out if we needed to work it out.
There must be something on Google we can use to translate feet and inches.
I couldn't tell you what it is, but I'm sure we could work it out.
Yeah.
Have to build that into the software, Julie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So great.
Fantastic.
I think it is. Oh, well done.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Maria. Okay. 53.81 something square feet. Okay, thank you. As I say, I think it is going to present some problems for some sites, especially those that are looking to reuse graves, because that means kind of deepening graves, which could then eat into that meter between the bottom of the grave and the groundwater. So, but I think if I sort of understood correctly, Heidi, that you don't envisage that cemeteries will have to close. It's just that they'll have to be permitted and put things into place to mitigate any.
Yes, so our intention is not at all to close down any cemeteries, unless there are some that are doing clearly bad practices, which we would hope wouldn't happen. Obviously, you guys are all working towards trying to do things by the book anyway. This process came about due to the lack of cemetery space in, particularly in the southeast, but across the country, where applications kept coming in for areas and the Environment Agency was just objecting because it was in a source protection zone or it was in a principal aquifer. And the problem we have with applications through the planning regime is once we've commented on the planning application, we have no control whatsoever on what happens. So the idea was if we could put it through the permitting process for these higher risk sites, we could allow them to go ahead, but then we could ask for monitoring, we could ask for a particular management plan so that bodies are buried in a particular way across the site so that it's not all in one corner, causing too much plume in one area. It's kind of spread across the hydraulic gradient, etc. But we can't do that as part of a planning application. So it was kind of tried to get away from us just blanketly objecting to planning applications just because it's in a high risk area, trying to work more with you as the industry to kind of the solution that would allow us to have a bit more control and you to be able to go ahead in these areas, because obviously we appreciate that, you know, space is at a minimum, it's not getting any better. Pandemic really hasn't helped with that. And it hasn't helped that our chief executive said you're not bringing this in during a pandemic, so we've kind of been stuck in the middle going we need to bring it in but we can't. So yeah, I mean, hopefully once we're able to get this through next year, the highest risk ones, you know, if they want to extend a bit nearer to the river or, you know, a bit nearer to the source protection zone, actually we can help that happen, but we'll just do it with some controls. So you have in the same way that for a landfill site, we would have a management plan. We would know exactly how the site is being used. We would have monitoring in place. We'd be able to see what's happening on the site in a bit more detail and be able to help with kind of managing that process to try and reduce the impact on the environment. After all, I mean, that's what we're here for. So.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. I think that was quite reassuring. I think, you know, our kind of initial reaction to the consultation was, oh no, all the cemeteries in the country are going to close. It's really reassuring.
Please don't do that. Please don't do that.
I don't think it would be a very popular move. It's reassuring to hear that, you know, that's definitely not your intention and that you want to work with authorities to make sure that burial remains a viable option.
Yeah, so definitely. And if you know, if you want to talk to me about it, then please do. I'm quite happy to listen to suggestions, use the consultation, email me. We can do what we can do to try and make this work for everybody. But yeah, we need to protect the environment as well. So it might not be exactly what you want. Can't guarantee I'll answer all your questions, but
I think you know, protecting our drinking water sources is pretty important. So I'm sure members will be, you know, keen to do what they can do to help with that as well. So thank you. Was there any other major ones?
There's a couple, maybe a couple of smaller ones, Heidi, just to kind of close this off. So does that 5 meters squared burial plot size assume a single burial per burial plot, and will double or triple depth graves still be possible under the new permit?
I think that would have to be built into the risk assessment. So obviously, if you have a double plot, it's doubling the contaminant load on that particular area. So I think that would just need to be built into the risk assessment so that you don't have all of the double plots all next to each other. It's kind of spread out across the gradient to try and minimise the impact. And those numbers are included in the total volume. So I think it's possible. I'm not saying you can't do it. Obviously, you have people who want to be buried together, etc. I get that. I think it would just need to be built into the risk assessment so that it's not a lot of contaminant loading all in one corner of the site. So we use all of the double plots up that end. No, don't do that. Let's try and spread it out a bit. Let's be sensible, try and minimize the impact, and also build that into the management plan so that it's obvious that's what you're doing as part of the ongoing maintenance of the site.
Okay, that makes sense. And maybe just one or two more very briefly. So are we aware of the discrepancy in guidance given between MOJ and the EA for burial depth? Natural burial currently has a special exemption for shallow depth burial for the benefit to the environment, of course, given the advantages of rapid aerobic decomposition. I'm not, maybe Julie, you aware of the discrepancies between that?
I wasn't aware of that. I'll write that down.
Well, the depth of burial is for local authority cemeteries anyway, is governed by local authority cemeteries order that says that there must be a minimum of 3 feet of soil between the top of the coffin and the surrounding surface, except for in some circumstances where it can be 2 meters where the soil is of such character. And then there is a shallow grave policy where burials can take place in more shallow graves, but they have to be within a lined chamber. So yeah, what DEFRA are saying does slightly contradict that, but LACO is legislation, so I don't know which would take precedence. I don't know. Maybe
we have to make sure they match up. So I will check that out and make sure that we make sure our wording agrees with the wording, or say this overall, that because, or whatever.
Yeah, and that's only for local authority cemeteries. There isn't anything for overriding for private cemeteries. Some private cemeteries may have their own Act of Parliament that specifies that, but otherwise I'm not aware of anything that applies across the board. So that may be where the DEFRA guidance can definitely assist. But it's interesting, this whole point about decomposition, because what you were saying earlier, Heidi, seems to imply that actually sometimes it might be better to hold back the decomposition and allow it to kind of happen more slowly rather than more quickly, which is what natural burial is. That I always thought that was a good thing. That's what we want to achieve.
Yeah, well, I suppose the thing with natural burial is it's much more consistent. So you just have the degradation over time, which follows the normal degradation curve. With something like so some of the seal caskets that we've seen recently, which is more of a kind of contained box, it then degrades within the box, and then when that ruptures you get a sudden release of maybe 10-15 years worth of degradation in one go. So no, it's not good to hold it back in terms of it's then going to just flush through the system. That's not what we want. We want it more gradual. But obviously, I mean, that's what a natural burial is more about anyway. It's more to do with the kind of consistent degradation over time. I mean, most situations it's fairly consistent. It's just there's somewhere, like you say, when they use seal caskets and they try and say, oh, is it all right if we bury it into water if we use a seal casket? And it's like, well, that's fine until the casket fails, and then we've got breach of the regulations because you've got all of that contamination going directly into groundwater. So yeah, I mean, in my book, I think it's better to be more natural.
But there's some cultural traditions that people do like caskets as well. So it's a tricky one to balance the expectations of bereaved people against doing our best to protect the environment. So
yeah.
Some challenges.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. We can't dictate what people's burial practices should be. That's not for us to do that. We're just trying to protect the environment. So obviously that needs to be built into any risk assessment for a site. So if you don't meet the general exemption criteria, then that can be built in. So, well, actually our burial practices are X, Y, and Z because, you know, this is what we believe or what have you.
Yeah.
So.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. And then Heidi, you know what? I think one last, very, very briefly, hopefully this will be a quick one for you. And I know you're feeling really unwell, so thank you. Will wall graves still be permitted? So say, for example, we're not able to get to 3 foot depth. Would a building up with a wall grave then still be permissible under the new?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay, fantastic.
It's basically an artificial unsaturated zone, isn't it? You're just building upwards rather than going down. Yeah.
That might be something to put into the consultation responses as well, to ask that question, so that we've got clarity on that.
Okay.
Great. I think if anyone has asked a question that we haven't answered, I'd be very happy to, if you want to email questions to me, and I can then coordinate with Heidi, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
We can get those answered. So I'm really grateful that you've done this, Heidi. When all you want to do is curl up with a lemon sip. Yeah. So really appreciate it. But if there is anyone who's got any burning questions, so should I say burning questions on this sort of thing? We're burying today, aren't we? We're not cremating. So if anyone has got any questions they want to ask Heidi, please do that through me, and I can coordinate those, and then we can publish responses, probably put them on the website. And if we feel there's enough to hold another session like this when Heidi's feeling a little bit better, then we'll certainly invite Heidi back. So really
that's fine, and I can send you written responses to the questions that you already sent me, if that would help.
Yeah, great, thank you. Brilliant, thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, like I said, I'm happy to work with you all. Any questions, please, send them via Julie, that's not a problem. Please use the consultation, please provide your comments. If there's something that's really not going to work for you, then please let us know, because that's what the consultation is there for, so please use it. And yeah, just talk to us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we can bring the session to an end there. I think Heidi, do go get that lemsip or get a lie down with a hot cup of tea. Thank you so much, Heidi, for taking the time when you're feeling so well. I really appreciate that. And Julie, of course, thank you as always. And to our attendees, we've had some really good questions, a lot of comments back and forth there in the chat. So thanks as always to everybody joining and taking the time to engage with the fortnightly webinars. We find them really interesting, and I hope we all find them very helpful. So thank you all. Have a great day and a nice afternoon. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.